Welcome in, everyone. Ready to dig into a topic that's, well, let's be honest, we all deal with it, but might not think about too deeply debt.
And trust me, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye.
That's why we're here. We're diving into David Graeber's Debt, the first 5,000 years, to uncover how this whole system evolved, from simple exchanges to, well, shaping entire civilizations.
What fascinates me is how debt isn't just about economics, dollars and cents. It's woven into our sense of morality, religion, even our values. It gets at the heart of what we owe each other, literally and figuratively.
Okay, so let's start with a basic question, one we probably all wondered about at some point. How did we go from, like, bartering chickens to these complex financial systems we have today?
That's where things get really interesting. The story we're often told, barter, then money, then credit. It's a bit too neat, don't you think?
You're saying it's not that straightforward.
Anthropologists argue that these pure barter economies, the kind you see in textbooks, they might never have actually existed as the primary mode of exchange.
Hold on, are you telling me those images of, like, cavemen trading furs for fish are totally off?
Pretty much. Take the Namiquara tribe, for example. They did trade, sure, but mainly with outsiders, and it was as much about navigating this tense social interaction as it was about the goods themselves.
So it was more about establishing a connection, almost like a ritual, rather than just a cold transaction.
Exactly. And that's crucial because, as Graeber argues, we cling to this barter myth because it fits so nicely into our market-driven worldview.
It makes it seem like market economies were the natural progression, inevitable even.
Precisely. But the reality, as we're starting to see, is far more nuanced. Systems of credit and debt were already in play long before the first coin was ever minted.
You're talking like ancient Mesopotamia.
Absolutely. Picture this. Temples acting as early banks, utilizing credit systems for trade, even providing loans. It completely changes how we view credit, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just about economic necessity, it was part of something bigger.
Exactly. Deeply intertwined with social obligations and moral codes.
It's amazing to think about these ancient civilizations having such sophisticated financial systems so central to their society. But it can't always have been, smooth sailing, right?
You're absolutely right. As we move into what's called the Axial Age, roughly 800 BC to 600 AD, we see coinage emerging in Greece, China, India, and this is where things take a bit of a turn.
A turn, how so?
Well, while driven partly by economic needs, the mass production of coins was also heavily influenced by, and this might surprise you, warfare.
Warfare. You're saying the need to pay armies fueled the spread of coinage and ultimately market economies as we know them.
Exactly. Empires needed a way to pay their soldiers, and coins offered a standardized portable form of payment. Unfortunately, though, this coincided with a much darker side of history, the surge in slavery.
That's a chilling thought, that something as fundamental as money could be so closely tied to such a brutal practice.
It's a stark reminder that economic advancement doesn't always equal social progress. Conquered people became commodities, fueling the economies of these growing empires. But even amidst all of this, there were voices questioning the morality of this whole system.
So even back then, people were grappling with the ethics of it all.
Absolutely. Ancient Greece, for instance, they debated whether a free man could ever truly be equal to a creditor.
It's like that power dynamic, right?
Exactly. And their literature is full of examples showcasing the tension, even violence, that could arise from debt, especially between social classes.
Like the story of Nicostratus and Apollodorus, right?
Yeah.
Their dispute over a debt turned into this bitter, very public feud.
Precisely. And it wasn't just the Greeks. The Bible itself is full of stories about debt, forgiveness, the potential for abuse. This wasn't a localized debate. It was a fundamental question pondered across cultures and throughout history.
It really makes you wonder, with such deep moral questions surrounding debt, even back then, are we even asking the right questions about it today? But before we get too philosophical, let's move on to the Middle Ages. How did they approach this whole debt dilemma?
Well, the Middle Ages actually saw a resurgence of credit systems. Think of it like running a tab at the local pub, settling up based on trust and community ties.
So a bit more, shall we say, informal.
In a way, yes, but there was this strong moral aversion to profiting from someone else's misfortune.
Right. The church wasn't exactly a fan of usury. Charging interest was seen as deeply unethical, almost predatory.
You've got it. It was considered a violation of the social order, taking advantage of someone in need. And this period also saw the emergence of something we might not expect: corporations.
Wait, corporations? As in those massive entities that are legally speaking, considered people.
The very same. And what's fascinating is that they were initially nonprofit, focused on organizing people and resources for a common purpose, not just profit.
So a very different beginning than what we might associate them with today.
Exactly. Of course, as we know, that changed over time, paving the way for modern capitalism as we know it. But that's a story for another time.
And what a story it is. Who knew debt had such a long and winding history? But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Coming up, we'll explore how the discovery of America and the influx of silver reshaped the global economy, and not always for the better. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into, well, debt. Before the break, we were talking about, of all things, corporations popping up in the Middle Ages. Now let's hop across the pond, shall we, to a time of huge global upheaval. The age of exploration, the discovery of America.
A pivotal moment in our story, for sure. This is when silver, flowing from the New World, really reshaped the global economy in ways most people wouldn't even imagine.
It's easy to picture those Spanish galleons, right, overflowing with gold and silver. But what was the real impact of all that precious metal flooding the world?
It really was unprecedented, this influx of silver from the Americas. It's tempting to see it as just this, windfall. But the reality is far more, well, complex. While some did get incredibly rich, this silver surge also triggered inflation, fueled conquests, even influenced the fate of entire empires.
Wow, so this shiny metal had the power to actually reshape destinies. Who benefited most from this silver tsunami, I guess you could say?
You might be surprised to hear it was actually China. They were the primary destination for much of that New World silver, and it played a huge role in their own economic boom during this period.
So while Europe is dealing with inflation, China's economy is booming. It really highlights just how interconnected the global economy was, even way back then.
Exactly. And it reminds us that with these huge economic shifts, there are always winners and losers. And even the supposed winners, even those conquistadors who risked it all to conquer the New World, they weren't immune to the pitfalls of debt.
Wait, even someone like Cortez, the conquistador who took down the Aztec Empire, I thought he was rolling in gold.
He had his moments of immense wealth, that's for sure. But the truth is, he was often caught in these cycles of debt, always needing to conquer more to pay off his growing debts.
Almost poetic, isn't it? The conqueror amassing this unimaginable wealth, yet still beholden to debt, shows that wealth, even on that scale, can be fleeting, precarious. But let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about the economic aspects of debt, but what about the debts that go beyond money? Those obligations that you can't really put a price on.
That's a great point. Throughout history, many cultures have recognized certain debts as, well, unpayable. These created these deep, lasting bonds of obligation.
Like the saying, I owe you my life. But more than just an expression, it carried real weight, a debt that could never truly be repaid.
Exactly. It points to something much deeper, something that connects us on a human level in a way that a ledger never could. A perfect example of this is the Tiv people of Nigeria. They had these elaborate systems of life debts and bride wealth that really illustrate this complex relationship between debt and, well, human value.
So debt could represent a profound sense of gratitude, even a lifelong tie to another person, or even a whole community. It wasn't just about reaching a zero balance.
Precisely. And that leads us to the modern world, a world where debt is, let's face it, everywhere. It's the lifeblood of our economic system. The question is, has it lost this deeper meaning, this moral dimension in our modern capitalist society?
It makes you think. Today, it seems like we're more likely to encounter credit scores and predatory lending practices than these profound, unpayable debts of the past.
It's a valid point. But maybe, just maybe, those ancient concepts of obligation and interconnectedness are more relevant than ever as we grapple with, well, the consequences of our modern debt-driven world.
It's kind of strange when you think about it, right? Like, we're surrounded by debt, student loans, mortgages, you name it. But somewhere along the line, it feels like we've, I don't know, lost sight of that deeper, more human side of it that we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's a disconnect that Graeber picks up on, too. He argues that, in a way, this detachment from the moral weight of debt has actually fueled a lot of the economic inequalities we see today.
It's almost like we've swapped out those age-old questions of moral obligation with, well, cold, hard numbers, right? Credit scores, interest rates, that kind of thing.
And that leads us to what I think is one of the most thought-provoking ideas in Graeber's book. It's this concept of primordial debt. He suggests that, in a way, we're all born into a debt we can never really repay.
A debt we can never repay. Okay, now you've got my attention. What exactly does he mean by that?
Well, think of it this way. We enter this world shaped by, what, countless generations before us, right? A world built on their sacrifices, their innovations, their very existence. So in a sense, we inherit this debt to the past, to the very fabric of life that sustains us.
I think I see where you're going with this. Like, we're all born with this kind of like cosmic IOU, a debt of gratitude for everything that came before us, for even having the chance to be alive.
Exactly. And recognizing this primordial debt, it can actually be profoundly liberating, even if it sounds kind of counterintuitive at first.
Liberating how?
Well, it frees us from this illusion that we can ever truly settle all our accounts, achieve some perfect state of being debt-free morally or economically.
So it's less about zeroing out our balance sheet and more about like living a life that acknowledges, that honors that interconnectedness.
Exactly. And I think that's a much more, well, hopeful, empowering way to think about debt, both, the financial sense and in the broader context of, well, just being human.
It's pretty amazing how a deep dive into the history of something like debt can lead us to these, well, pretty profound realizations about ourselves and our place in the world.
It speaks to the power of history, don't you think? It's not just about, dates and names. It's about understanding these forces that have shaped us that can hopefully, guide us towards a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And to everyone listening, if you're out there grappling with your own debts, big or small, remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together, cosmically indebted and all.
That's right. And maybe, just maybe, this realization, instead of feeling like a burden, it can be a source of strength, a call to action, a reminder to live a life, well, worthy of this incredible gift that we've been given.
What a great note to end on. So next time you open that credit card statement or you're feeling the weight of those student loans, take a second, just a moment, to reflect on this idea of primordial debt. Ask yourself, what can I do even just today, to live a life that's a little more generous, a little more compassionate, a life that really contributes something meaningful? You have be surprised by what you come up with.
And on that note, I think we'll leave you to ponder this fascinating, complex, and ever-evolving story of debt.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.